Hello, how are you? I hope you are fine. Now, in this video, we are going to continue the fourth part of the same story, whose name is The Triumph of Surgery. They were days of deep content, starting well with the extra egg in the morning, improved and sustained by the midway wine, and finishing luxuriously round the fire with the brandy. When Mrs. Pumphrey came to know that Tricky is becoming more and more better, he is recovering from his ill health, then, due to the feeling of concern, love, and affection for Tricky, she started sending every day eggs and wine to Tricky. So, till here we have studied, and now here it is showing, these lines are showing that the doctor was too much enjoying after eating the egg in the morning, after drinking the wine in the lunch, and during the night also he was drinking the brandy. And how he was drinking the brandy? Since it was winter season, it was quite cold, so he used to put a fire around him in the form of firewood, and then he used to drink brandy. So in this way he was too much enjoying. It was a temptation to keep Tricky as a permanent guest, but I knew Mrs. Pumphrey was suffering after a fortnight, felt compelled to phone and tell her that the little dog had recovered and was awaiting collection. Because of Tricky, this doctor was getting egg and wine every day. So the doctor wanted to keep Tricky as a permanent guest. Permanent guest means always Tricky should stay in the hospital. He should not go anywhere. This was the dream of the doctor. But he knew very well that Mrs. Pumphrey was in great love with this dog. So she would not allow a doctor to keep Tricky as a permanent guest in the hospital. And every fortnight, means after every 15 days, she used to call. Every day she used to call, but till now it was 15 days are over for Tricky in the hospital. So every day she used to call the doctor to ask about Tricky, that how was he and how he is recovering from his ill health and when he will come back to home. Means she was eagerly waiting for Tricky to come back to home. Within minutes, about 30 feet of gleaming black metal drew up outside the surgery. The chauffeur opened the door, and I could just make out the figure of Mrs. Pumphrey, almost lost in the interior. After a few minutes, a car came in front of the hospital. The driver was driving the car. Chauffeur means the driver, and he himself opened the door of the car. And who stepped out from the car? Mrs. Pumphrey. Her hands were tightly clasped in front of her. Her lips trembled. "Oh, Mr. Harriet, do tell me the truth. Is he really better?" As she came out of the car, she moved towards the hospital, and when she met the doctor, she asked Mr. Harriet, who was the doctor, she asked him that, "Really tell me the truth. Don't tell me lie. Is the condition of Tricky better than before, or is it same?" "Yes, he is fine. There is no need for you to get out of the car. I'll go and fetch him." So the doctor told that, "Why you came out of the car? You can only sit in the car and wait for Tricky. I will go and bring him from inside." I walked through the house into the garden. Where he was? In the garden. He was playing in the garden. A mass of dogs was hurtling round and round the lawn, and in their midst, ears flapping, tail waving, was the little golden figure of Tricky. Now, what was the color of the dog? It was golden, and he was flapping his ears, he was moving his ears up and down, and his tail was waving. In 2 weeks, he had been transformed into a lithe, hard muscle animal. When Tricky was with Mrs. Pumphrey, he was not so, you can say, strong. He was not looking strong. He was looking a very weak animal. But now, since he was in the hospital, he has changed into a hard muscle animal, a very strong animal. He was keeping up well with the pack, stretching out in great bounds, his chest almost brushing the ground. It means he has been transformed into a robust and strong animal. I carried him back along the passage to the front of the house. The chauffeur was still holding the car door open, and when Tricky saw his mistress, he took off from my arms in a tremendous leap and sailed into Mrs. Pumphrey's lap. Now, as soon as Tricky was brought from the garden to the front door, Tricky saw his mistress. Mistress means Mrs. Pumphrey. And he was so happy, he was so joyful to see the mistress that he jumped from the arms of the doctor. The doctor was holding the doctor was holding the dog in his arms. So the dog jumped from the arms of the doctor and came into the lap of Mrs. Truimph. She gave a startle. She was very surprised to see the dog. Oh, and then had to defend herself as he swarmed over her, licking her face and barking. See how the dog was showing the care and affection towards the mistress. What he did? He jumped into her arms and he started licking. Licking means chatna. He started licking the face of Mrs. Pumphrey and also started barking. During the excitement, I helped the chauffeur to bring out the bats, toys, cushions, coats, and bowls, none of which had been used. So many things were given by Mrs. Pumphrey to Tricky when he was coming from her house to the hospital. So, what were the things which were given for Tricky? Beds means the bed for sleeping, toys, cushions, coat, and bowls. But none of this was used. The doctor did not use any of these things. As the car moved away, Mrs. Pumphrey leaned out of the window. Now, the dog was taken back into the car, and when the car was going from the hospital towards her house, she leaned out of the window, means she poked her head out of the window. Tears shone in her eyes, her lips trembled. She was crying, tears were coming in her eyes. Why the tears were coming in her eyes? Because she was very, very excited and happy to see the condition of the dog. The dog has improved a lot. Oh, Mr. Harriet, she cried, how can I ever thank you? This is a triumph of surgery. So, while going, she thanked Mr. Harriet and she told that I could not have imagined that my dog would become better than before. I thought that he is getting more and more sick, but it was only because of your surgery. This dog has improved in the health. Now, what is the irony here? Mrs. Pumphrey thought that the doctor had treated the dog. He has done the surgery on the dog and he has given a lot of medication, and because of this, the dog is improved. But we saw that the doctor was very tactful, very intelligent. He has clearly understood that this dog does not need surgery. It is only because of the lifestyle which the dog was living at Mrs. Pumphrey's house. He was not able to be in his health. He was not proper in his health. What all the dogs need? The dogs need proper environment, not excessive food, only enough food. The doctor in the hospital has not given him food to eat for 3 days, only given the water to drink. So we saw that the dog has improved in his condition. The dog has started playing with the other dogs in the garden. He was also living a free life. He did not wanted a luxurious life. He wanted a free life like other dogs live. Joyful life, playful life. Okay. The restrictions and the foundations which were there on the dog in Mrs. Pumphrey's house, all those restrictions were removed from the dog's life in the hospital, the doctor has not put any restriction on him. He was free to go anywhere. And why Mrs. Pumphrey has put the restrictions on the dog? Because she was in very much love and affection with the dog. She did not want that the dog should go anywhere away from her eyes. 24 hours the dog should stay in front of her only. This was only because of her love, too much of love. So, what is the moral we learn from this story? That excessive of anything is too bad. If you give anything in excess, maybe that is the food, that is the love, that the feeling of care, feeling of affection, that is bad. Here Mrs. Pumphrey was in excessive love, excessive care, excessive affection with Tricky, and she also gave excessive food to Tricky. And that excess of anything, that excess of all these things, excess means in too much amount of all these things, was dangerous for Tricky. And because of this excess only, he suffered in his health. And also Tricky was being treated as the son of Mrs. Pumphrey. Mrs. Pumphrey was not having any child, so the dog was only her child. So if the parents, one more lesson we learn from here, that parents should not give excessive love or excessive care towards show excessive care towards the children. Otherwise, the children can not improve in their life. Okay, they become dull, they become inactive like Tricky. So this is the moral which we learn from the story. I hope the story is clear to you. Now let's come to the question answers of the book. First question is, what kind of a person do you think the narrator, a veterinary surgeon, is? Would you say he is tactful as well as full of common sense? So I'm just discussing the points. I'm not giving you line by line answer to you. Here the meaning of the question is, it is asked that do you think that the veterinary surgeon was tactful as well as full of common sense? What kind of person he was? Yes, according to us, he was really tactful and he was full of common sense. Why? Because unnecessarily suggesting surgery on Tricky, what he did, he understood that what is the reason of his ill health. The reason of his ill health is excessive food, excessive care, excessive love and excessive affection, which was shown by Mrs. Pumphrey towards Tricky. So when he brought Tricky to the hospital, he has not done any surgery on Tricky, but what things he followed, he only gave water to drink. He did not give any food to eat to Tricky for 2-3 days. And suddenly he observed the change in Tricky. The Tricky started playing with the other dogs. The Tricky started running here and there. All his inactiveness and all his dullness went away. And the same activeness came back in the life of Tricky. Again he became the same dog like the other dogs in the world. So this was the effective treatment which was done by the doctor on Tricky. And this effective treatment Mrs. Pumphrey was not able to understand. She thought that only excessive food, excessive care and excessive affection can make Tricky happy. But this was not so. In fact, all these things were making Tricky more inactive, more dull and more lethargic, and even too more fat. Second question, do you think there are also parents like Mrs. Truimph? Yes, there are many parents who take care of their children, who take too much care of their children. They are in excessive love with their children, and because of this too much care and love and affection only, spoil the life of children. Next, do you think Tricky was happy to go home? What do you think will happen now? Obviously, when Tricky saw Mrs. Pumphrey, you have read that when Tricky saw Mrs. Pumphrey, he was so happy, he was so excited that he jumped out from the lap of the doctor and he went into the lap of Mrs. Pumphrey, and he started licking the face of Mrs. Pumphrey. Also, he uh, shouted, means he barked. So these all shows that Tricky was in love with Mrs. Pumphrey, and he was also very happy to see the owner, his owner. What do you think will happen now? Now, will Mrs. Pumphrey understand the problem of Tricky, and now will she give limited food to Tricky or not? So we hope that now the way of her feeding to Tricky will improve. She will not give excessive food to Tricky, and in this way Tricky will be fit, lean and happy. Obviously, he will improve in his health. Next, do you think this is a real life episode or mere fiction? Fiction means it is just an imaginary. The events are all imaginary. Or is it a mixture of both? We think that it is a mixture of both because it is true that the author is a doctor, and in his life he must have gone through many cases he was a veterinary doctor, so he was treating the animals, not the human beings. So we think that in his real life he has undergone many such cases like Tricky. But though it is a real incident, but still there are some parts in the story which is the work of fiction. Maybe to make the story more interesting, more dramatic, he has included some parts which are based on fiction, but the main theme of this story is based on real life episode. This we think. Okay, we are not sure about it, but we think so. So in this way we have completed the explanation of the chapter 1. We have also discussed a few questions. I have given you just the points which you can write in the question so that you can get some better marks. Okay, so this is all about. Now we will come with the next video for the next chapter. Thank you.